but I had to take. Hello, everybody. This is Empowering Democracy. I'm your host, Joe Firestone. And our topics for tonight are the West, losing Russia and Eurasia. Also, Scott Ritter, on the debate, that is the Trump and Biden debate, and on Israel losing the war. Then I'm going to go over an old post of mine on cures for debt ceiling crises, to follow on with the show I did last Friday. Something I didn't finish last Friday. And then finally, I have a little surprise. We're going to go over a tweet storm by Robert C. Hockett, some of his thoughts in reply to the decision of the Supreme Court to grant immunity to presidents. So I'm going to begin with a piece from Alastair Crooke about how the West is losing both Russia, and Eurasia, or has lost both Russia, and Eurasia. And I'm going to start with that right now. Okay, I just went to Facebook to share this post. It looks like they removed something, of mine. They removed the post on July 2nd, 2024, called it spam. That was my post on a decision by the Supreme Court. Anyway. Okay, I've submitted for a review of that post. I think Facebook is getting very oppressive. But many people have found that before me, so I guess that's nothing new. Anyway, I'm going to share my post for tonight. I'm sorry that review I'm sorry that actually took so long for me to get to the real business of the show, but that was a surprise to me. I hadn't seen that before. So let me continue with what I was doing then. This is a piece from Alastair Crooke. The West indubitably has lost Russia and is losing Eurasia too. This is from Alastair Crooke on July 1st. Is not President Putin's purpose in visiting North Korea and Vietnam now clear in the context of the Eurasian Security Architecture Project? There perhaps was a momentary shrugging off of slumber in Washington this week as they read the account of Sergei Lavrov's démarche to the U.S. ambassador in Moscow. Russia was telling the U.S., quote, "We are no longer at peace," unquote. Not just, quote, "no longer at peace." Russia was holding the U.S. responsible for the cluster strike on a Crimean beach on last Sunday's Pentecost holiday, killing several, including children, and injuring many more. The U.S. thereby, quote, "became party," unquote, to the proxy war in Ukraine. It was an American-supplied ATACMS program by American specialists, and drawing on U.S. data, Russian statement read, quote, "retaliatory measures will certainly follow." Evidently, somewhere an amber light flashed hues of pink and red. The Pentagon grasped that something has happened, quote, "no going around it. This could escalate badly." The U.S. Defense Secretary, after a pause since March 2023, reached for the phone to call his Russian counterpart. Quote, "The U.S. regretted civilian deaths. The Ukrainians had full targeting discretion. The Russian public, however, is plain furious." The diplomatic argot of, quote, "there now being a state of betweenness, not war and not peace," unquote, is but the, quote, "half of it," unquote. The West has lost Russia much more profoundly than is understood. President Putin, in his statement to the Foreign Ministry Board in the wake of the G7 sword rattling, detailed just how we had arrived at this pivotal juncture of inevitable escalation. Putin indicated that the gravity of the situation demanded a, quote, "last chance" offered to the West, one that Putin emphatically said was to be, quote, "no temporary ceasefire for Kyiv to prepare a new offensive, nor a freezing the conflict, but rather needed to be about the war's final completion," unquote. It has been widely understood that the only credible way to end the Ukraine war would be a, quote, "peace agreement emerging through negotiation between Russia and the U.S. This, however, is rooted in a familiar U.S.-centric version, quote, "waiting on Washington." Lavrov archly commented, in paraphrase, that if anyone imagines we are, quote, waiting for Godot and, quote, will run for it, unquote, they are mistaken. Moscow has something much more radical in mind, something that will shock the West. Moscow and China are not simply waiting upon the whims of the West, but plan to invert completely the security architecture paradigm to create an, quote, alt, unquote, architecture for the, quote, vast space, unquote, of Eurasia, no less. It is intended to exit the existing bloc zero-sum confrontation. The new confrontation is not envisaged. However, the new architecture nevertheless is intended to enforce, quote, external actors, unquote, to curtail their hegemony across the continent. Excuse me. In the Foreign Ministry address, Putin explicitly looked ahead to the collapse of the Euro-Atlantic security system into a new architecture emerging, quote, the world will never be the same again, unquote, he said. What did he mean? Yuri Ushakov, Putin's principal foreign policy advisor at the Primakov Readings Forum, clarified Putin's, quote, sparse, unquote, illusion. Ushakov reportedly said that Russia increasingly has come to the view there is not going to be any long-term reshaping of the security system in Europe, and without any major reshaping, there will be no, quote, final completion, unquote, Putin's words, to the conflict in Ukraine. Yushakov explained that this unified and indivisible security system in Eurasia must replace the Euro-Atlantic and Eurocentric models that are now receding into oblivion. Quote, this speech of Putin at the Russian Foreign Ministry, I would say, sets the vector of further activities of our country at the international stage, including the building of a single and indivisible security system in Eurasia, unquote, Yushakov said. So this is so important, okay, everybody. This is a real change of the paradigm. It presents an entirely different outlook to the international system, and it puts the collective West, it seems to me, into a position of non-relevance compared to what's going on in the rest of the world. Going on with the article, the dangers of excessive propaganda were apparent in an earlier episode where a major state found itself trapped by its own demonization of its adversaries. South Africa security architecture for Angola and Southwest Africa, now Namibia, too had fallen apart by 1980. I was there at the time. The South African Defense Forces still retained a residue of immense destructive capacity to the north of South Africa, but the use of that force was not yielding any political solution or amelioration. Rather, it was taking South Africa to oblivion, just as Ushakov described the Euro-Atlantic model today. Pretoria wanted change. It was ready, in principle, to do a deal with the Southwest Africa Political Organization, SWAPO, but the attempt to implement a ceasefire fell apart in early 1981. The biggest problem was that the South African apartheid government had so succeeded with their propaganda and demonization of SWAPO as being both Marxist and terrorist, unquote, that their public recoiled at any deal, and it was to be another decade and would take a geostrategic revolution before a settlement finally became possible. Today, the U.S. and European Union security elite have been so, quote, successful, unquote, with the equally exaggerated anti-Russian propaganda that they too are trapped by it. Even if they wanted to, which they don't, a replacement security architecture may simply prove to be but unnegotiable, quote unquote, for years to come. So as Lavrov has underlined, Eurasian countries have come to the realization that security on the continent must be built from within, free and far from American influence. In this conceptualization, the principle of indivisibility of security, a quality not implemented in the Euro-Atlantic project, can and should become the key notion around which the Eurasian structure can be built, Lavrov specified. Here in this, quote, indivisibility, unquote, is to be found the real and not the nominal implementation of the provisions of the UN Charter, including the principle of sovereign equality. Eurasian countries are pooling efforts together to jointly counter the US claims on global hegemony and the West's interference in other states' affairs, Lavrov said at the Primakov Readings Forum on Wednesday. The US and other Western countries, quote, are trying to interfere in the affairs, quote, unquote, of Eurasia, transferring NATO infrastructure to Asia, holding joint drills, and creating new pacts. Lavrov predicted, quote, this is a geopolitical struggle. This has always been and will perhaps last for long, and maybe we will not see an end to this process. Yet it is a fact that the course towards control from the ocean of everything that occurs everywhere is now countered by the course towards uniting the efforts of Eurasian countries. The start of consultation on a new security structure does not yet indicate the creation of a military political alliance similar to NATO. Quote, okay, initially, it may well exist in the form of a forum or consultation mechanism of interested countries, not burdened with excessive organizational institutional obligations, writes Ivan Timofeyev. However, the quote parameters unquote to this system, explained Maria Zakharova, quote, will not only ensure long-lasting peace, but also avoid major geopolitical upheavals due to the crisis of globalization built according to Western patterns. It will create reliable military political guarantees for the protection of both the Russian Federation and other countries of the macro region from external threats, create a space free from conflicts and favorable for development by eliminating the destabilizing influence of extra-regional players on Eurasian processes. In short, this will mean curtailing the military presence of external powers inside of Eurasia, unquote. So what they're talking about here is ejecting the collective West from the landmass, okay, of Eurasia, or at least simply limiting the Western influence to the relatively small peninsula, okay, of Europe, and perhaps not all of Europe either. The honorary chair of Russia's Council for Foreign and Defense Policy, Sergei Karaganov, in a recent interview, however, inserts his more sober analysis. Quote, ultimately, we're heading for a real world war, a full-blown war. The foundation of the old world system is bulging at the seams, and conflicts will break out. It is necessary to block the way leading to such a war. Conflicts are already brewing and taking place in all areas. Quote, The UN is a dying breed, saddled with a Western apparatus and therefore unreformable. Well, let it remain. But we need to build parallel structures. I think we should build parallel systems by expanding BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, that is to say, SCO or SCO, developing their interaction, with ASEAN, the League of Arab States, the Organization of African Unity, Latin American, Mercosur, etc., unquote, quote again. We're interested in establishing a multilateral nuclear deterrence system in the world. So I am personally not worried by the emergence of new nuclear powers and the strengthening of old ones, simply because reliance on people's reason doesn't work. There must be fear. There must be greater reliance on a, quote, nuclear deterrence fear, inspiring, sobering up, unquote. The nuclear policy aspect is a complex and contentious issue today in Russia. Some argue that an overly restrictive Russian nuclear doctrine can be dangerous, should it cause adversaries to become overly blasé. That is to say that adversaries become unimpressed or indifferent, to the deterrence effect, so as to dismiss its reality. Others prefer a posture of very last resort. All agree, however, that there are many stages of escalation available to a Eurasian security architecture other than the nuclear stage. Yet the capacity for continent-wide nuclear, quote, security lock, unquote, versus a nuclear-equipped NATO is evident. Russia, China, India, Pakistan, and now North Korea are all nuclear weapon states. So a certain degree of deterrence potential is baked in. Other, quote, steps of escalation, unquote, no doubt will be at the center of discussions at the Kazan BRICS summit this October. For a security architecture is not conceptually simply military. The agenda embraces trade, financial, and sanctions issues. The simple logic of inverting the NATO military paradigm to yield an alt, quote unquote, Eurasian security system would seem, through force of logic alone, to argue that if the security paradigm is to be inverted, then the Western financial and trading hegemony must be inverted too. De-dollarization, of course, is already on the agenda, with tangible mechanisms likely to be unveiled in October. But if the West now feels free to sanction Eurasia at whim, the potential is also there for Eurasia reciprocally to sanction both the US or Europe or both. Yes, we have, quote, lost, unquote, Russia, not forever, and we may lose much more. Is not President Putin's purpose in visiting North Korea and Vietnam now clear in the context of the Eurasian Security Project? They are part of it. And to paraphrase C.P. Cavafy's celebrated poem, why this sudden bewilderment, this confusion, how serious people's faces have become? Because night has fallen and the Russians haven't come. And some of our men just in from the border say, there are no Russians any longer. Quote, now, what's going to happen to us without the Russians, unquote. Quote again, they were a kind of solution, unquote. So the West is turning away, I should say Russia is now turning away completely from the West and is building a Eurasian security architecture. And that is an understanding that everyone must have. That is an understanding that everyone must keep close and keep very visible, because that changes the world, has already changed it, and will be changing it more as the weeks and months and years actually go by. So I will go on to my next piece at this point. April says, Sean, Judge Napolitano earlier today that Zelensky wants to deal, and he sounded defeated. On which of the judges' programs did you see that? Because I didn't have a chance to watch some of them yet, today, but I'd like to know which one. Joe, won't the immunity of the king ruling make other nations think, holy shit, the hegemon will not be held accountable ever? Nor anything, we better strike before they do? No, I don't think so, because I don't think that, well, okay, first of all, it all depends on who the king is going to be. Okay, if the king is going to be Donald Trump, and he sets out to conciliate, then they might be thinking, well, maybe we can deal with this king. If the king turns out to be Bobby Kennedy, they're probably certainly going to think, well, we can certainly deal with this king. Of course, the king right now is Joe Biden, and it's the beginning of July. He's going to be there for most of the next 7 months. So the big question is, what will he do with the powers of kingship? Well, we'll explore that actually much later in this stream. Is Vietnam a U.S. vassal like Japan is? I don't believe so. I don't believe so. There's plenty of trade, with Vietnam now. But I think Russia is still a factor, in Vietnam. They're having plenty of trade with them too. And I think Vietnam will probably join BRICS. So no, I don't think Vietnam is a U.S. vassal, in the same way Japan is. April says, I'm not sure which times it was originally because he has several streams per day. But Scott was on it talking about Ukraine. Yeah, I haven't had a chance to watch Scott, on there today, because my schedule today was very compressed. And so I haven't had a chance to make it to Scott's video, but I'll certainly take it in probably after this stream tonight, or certainly tomorrow very early, April. I'm glad you had a chance to watch it. So let me go to the next piece, which is actually from Scott. It is his impressions of the debate. It's called the Democracy Report Card. It was done on June 28th, 2024. Here's a picture of Iranians voting in the 2024 presidential election on the left, and on the right is Trump and Biden at the CNN debate. A democratic republic and Islamic theocracy put their respective democratic systems on full display for the world. In one, democracy emerged victorious. In the other, two geriatrics embarrassed themselves. The American presidential, unquote, silly season, unquote, has been in full swing for more than a year and a half. Former President Donald Trump announced his candidacy on November 15, 2022. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. did the same on April 5th, 2023, followed by the incumbent Joe Biden on April 25th, 2023. A score or more of other persons who announced their candidacies have since withdrawn from the race. A few remain who aren't serious contenders. Hundreds of millions of dollars have been raised and spent by these candidates and their supporters. More than $1 billion will be spent before this race is finished. Oh, yeah, more than, Scott, more than $7 billion will be spent before this race is finished. More than $7 billion. Trump and Biden, if Biden stays in, will each spend roughly $3 billion. Okay, alone. I don't know if Bobby Kennedy will spend $1 billion, but he'll probably spend 500,000. So that's $6.5 billion right there. And then there are other candidates who are running. Money, more than politics, is a litmus test for American democracy. If you have it, you can throw your hat into the ring. Without it, you have no chance. Scott's absolutely right, of course. Iran lost its president, Ibrahim Raisi, in a tragic helicopter crash on May 19, 2024. Under the Iranian constitution, a new election had to be organized within 50 days. Iran announced that the election would be held on June 28, 2024. The Guardian Council, under Iranian constitution, evaluated several candidates, including President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, who had indicated their interest in running for the vacant seat. 6 candidates were deemed qualified, but Ahmadinejad was not one of them. The principal factor considered by the Guardian Council when approving a candidate is their adherence to the Islamic values of the Islamic Republic of Iran. But money does not factor into their consideration at all. Yeah, but of course, religion factors into their consideration. So I think that's a limitation on democracy, okay, in Iran. Forgive me for thinking that way. The Iranian presidential campaign season ran from June 12th through June 27th. During this time, 5 televised debates where all candidates were provided an equal opportunity to respond to questions and articulate their respective positions on the issues of the day. 2 candidates eventually withdrew from the race, leaving 4. Speaker of the Parliament, Mohammad Ghalibaf, the former nuclear negotiator, Saeed Jalili, a reformist, Masoud Pezeshkian, okay, and Mustafa Pourmohammadi, a former Minister of Justice. On June 27, CNN held the first of 2 scheduled debates between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was not permitted to participate. Why was he not permitted to participate? Well, most probably because he did not share the neoliberal values of Donald Trump and Joe Biden and the 2 parties they represent. There was no live audience, and the moderators of the debate were able to silence the microphones of the participants to prevent disruptions from either candidate. One candidate looked as if he was more suited to a retirement home. The other showed a disturbing inability to tell the truth. Neither did their nation proud, said Scott. I thought that last paragraph was very, very well done. It wasn't really too extreme in rhetoric, but it made the point. On June 28th, the people of Iran went to the polls. Voting was extended until midnight to accommodate those eligible voters who wanted to cast their votes. There are parts of the world where democracy thrives, says Scott. And then there is the United States. So, I thought that piece, was rather excellent. And described things quite well. I would like now to go on to the next piece, which is also involves Scott Ritter. And this is I'm going to play a clip from it was from a video released by Ahuan TV. They have 118K subscribers, and they evidently specialize in scraping the work of other people. In this case, it's a clip, and I won't play the whole clip. This is a 35-minute clip. I'm only going to play 4 minutes of it. It's from an interview that Nima Rastami Al-Khurshid had with Scott Ritter. Most of what we'll be hearing will be Scott Ritter, in which he very clearly summarizes his view of Israel's losing situation right now. In a very few minutes. I thought this was quite important, so I'm going to play it for you and comment on it from time to time. Am I sharing it? No, I am not sharing it. So I must share it. There we go. You should be seeing it now. I'll play the beginning of it in about roughly 4 minutes of it.
Before Gaza conflict began, he's a man who made a gambit to take control of the Israeli judiciary so that he would not be charged with corruption charges. He's a corrupt individual.
Speaking, of course, of the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu.
Morally corrupt, politically corrupt. So he was dead man walking before this conflict started. This conflict allowed him to extend his political life by becoming a war prime minister, but he has fumbled this horribly. The only thing he's succeeded in is staying in power. He's lost this war, and now his war cabinet is collapsed. He's making a gambit to bring in even more right-wing people to sustain this. But the bottom line is his political future is dark. It's over. So to say he's gained anything, he's basically destroyed whatever was left of his reputation. He will go down in history as, and this is ultimately where we are, the man who destroyed Israel, the man who is why there is no longer a state of Israel.
He will also go down as the butcher of Gaza, obviously.
Because there will no longer be a state of Israel. Netanyahu has killed Israel. Israel can't continue to exist. It can't beat Hamas. It's lost the support of the world. It's losing even more support. You have a UN Security Council resolution supported by the United States against Israel. You have President Biden threatening to do things to Israel if he doesn't do this. But no matter what, the propaganda exercise, which was how Israel sold itself to the world and to itself, is finished. Israel's been exposed as a fundamentally morally corrupt state.
I think that point of Scott's is very important and also pretty deep. In other words, he recognized that the Israeli propaganda was not only intended to present the face to the outside world and to convince them that Israel was a state that was worth actually respecting, but also he recognized that the purpose of Israeli propaganda was also to socialize the people, inside of Israel, who continued over a period of many years while they fell deeper and deeper, into apartheid. Its purpose was the purpose of the propaganda was to convince them that they were doing the right thing and that collectively they were decent people. Scott sees that, and I think it's a very important point that he's making.
The Zionist enterprise is one that's based upon apartheid and genocide. Two words that people were struggling to, you weren't allowed to say these words beforehand. Today, it's embraced by the world.
I have to add another perspective to this. My family in New York City was a Zionist family, as I was growing up. My father was a member of the Zionist Organization, of America. And in those days, he was fairly well off. And he gave a considerable amount of money to the Zionist Organization of America. So there was financial support. Now, in doing this, the furthest thing from his mind, the furthest thing from his recognition or his understanding, was that Israel was an apartheid state. The furthest thing from his understanding was that the state of Israel was a genocidal state. That kind of understanding, my father died in 1986. Even by 1986, that kind of understanding was nowhere near his perception or conception. He thought of the Israeli people, as moral. He thought of the Israeli army, as moral. He just did not see the reality. Scott Ritter himself worked with the Israelis during the latter part of the 1990s. He was there for the assassination, of Prime Minister Rabin. He didn't understand at that point, that they were genocidal. He speaks of his experiences there. He used to be a very strong supporter, of Israel. So the Israeli propaganda worked wonderfully well for a very long time going on.
Apartheid state, a genocide state. This is how Israel is defined. Its economy is in shambles. The only way the Israeli economy was going to be sustainable is if Israel normalized relations with its Arab neighbors and became an integral part of whatever economic miracle they were trying to do, whether you wanted to call it the India-Middle East Economic Corridor or some other version thereof. That's over. That's not happening. The Israelis find themselves, the Houthi have effectively blockaded the Israeli ports. They're not going to recover. Hezbollah and Hamas have shown that Israel will never live in peace, ever. That the skies of Israel can be filled with missiles at any time, and that's not part of the Israeli dream that people flock to when they, when they took Aliyah. People are starting to leave Israel, and increasingly people will flee Israel because you can't live in Israel. It's unsustainable. Israel will be compelled because of international pressure to seek a two-state solution. In order to do this, though, Israel will have to solve a number of internal problems, one of which is the West Bank settlers. Those settlements will have to go. This will lead to a major fracture, political fracture, societal fracture in Israel.
Of course, I've spoken of this, any number of times, and I quite agree with Scott's analysis here. The settlers have to go. I've even talked about the possibilities of the Iranians facilitating this by actually attacking the Israeli settlements, in the West Bank with their precision rocket fire, forcing the settlers thereby to leave.
More people will flee Israel. Ultimately, what will happen is that the demographics of Israel will be altered such that it becomes impossible to speak of a two-state solution because the Israeli element of the two-state solution is so minimal that it has to become a one-state solution. And this is what will happen. Israel will cease to exist. It will be replaced by something called Palestine. In Palestine, there will be a Jewish component. There will be a Christian component, but it will be a predominantly Muslim component. That's the future of this region. And there's nothing that anybody can do to stop it. The trajectory of history is such that Israel has not only morally lost the right to exist, but they have practically lost the ability to exist over time. Because all the things that are required to keep the Zionist entity known as Israel alive and well and living are finished.
In your opinion, does Zionism care about the future of Israel? Because what they're doing right now, what they've been doing, it just again.
Okay, I'm going to end it, at that point. I thought that was a beautiful summary of where things actually stand. In other videos this week, Scott has been talking about the possibility of Israel to stay in existence, of them attacking Hezbollah and using neutron bombs there to actually ferret them out. Scott, however, doesn't think that alternative, is going to work, and I don't think so either, because so many rockets can be rained down on Israel so as to devastate it. They might get in a few licks with neutron bombs, but they won't be able to stop the onslaught, of the Hezbollah rockets. And if they use neutron bombs, then of course Iran is going to join the conflict, at that point. And that leads to the scenarios of thousands and thousands, of rockets hitting the settlers in the West Bank and driving them out of Israel. But Hezbollah itself, without help from Iran, can devastate Israel's two major cities, Tel Aviv, and Haifa. And Hezbollah can reach any point in Israel, as can Iran, with their rockets. I'm not even talking about the Syrian resistance or the Iraqi resistance or the Houthis. Not even talking about any possible aid from Russia, which may come. So it is looking very dire for Israel if they don't stop what they're doing and agree to negotiate a two-state solution right now. They will have little chance to continue to exist. But then the possibility occurs, or the question occurs, can they exist if they are a normal state? I'm not sure they can. I'm not sure that many of the citizens would stay there if they were just a normal state and posed no promise of further expansion to the whole, of Palestine. It seems to me the more religious people, not the extremely religious people who don't believe in the state of Israel at all, but it seems to me the messianic right-wing religious people are so inspired by Israel because of the promise of greater Israel. And if Israel gave up that promise, they very well might return to the lands from which they came. So I'm now going to look over some of your comments before I go on to the unfinished business from Friday. There's DIC. April said, oh, Pepe was on 23 hours ago too, but I didn't catch that. I did catch Pepe. He was brilliant 23 hours ago and worked very well with the judge. I think he and the judge are having kind of a love affair, right now. April says, if Scott was streamed 9 hours ago, it says Scott was streamed 9 hours ago, but I'm never clear if he restreams his shows. It's often the case that other people are restreaming parts of his shows. He's on so many shows, in addition to his own shows. I think he has about 4 of his own per week. He has the Jeff Norman shows, and I think he has another 2 shows of his own. Okay, but then he's on with Danny Haifang very frequently. He's on, with Nima very frequently. He's on with Anya very frequently. He is really all over the place. He works very, very hard. Robert says, I'd like to know where Scott Ritter gets his information. Well, I think he gets his information about the general state of weapons and armaments and things like that, and the progress of the war and things like that from, I think he reads many, many military magazines, and I think that, of course, he also has a great background in this area to begin with, but also, of course, he's very much into the Telegram channels. And he spends a lot of time in watching and listening, to the Telegram channels. He seems to work like 48 hours a day. It's just incredible. April says 149K views. If you had a fraction of those, we could hashtag dump the corruption for sure. Keeping my fingers crossed. Thank you, April. I think you're talking about the views that Scott got on Judge Napolitano's show. I read that Egypt and Jordan owe Israel a lot of money, and that's why they won't help the refugees. So heartbreaking. I think with Egypt, it's more the case that the U.S. has gone to Egypt and said that they would take care of Egypt's debts at the World Bank and the IMF to the tune of something like $150 billion if Egypt would refrain from attacking Israel. I think there's some kind of deal like that that's in place. So I don't think it's so much the money they owe to Israel, because what they would just do if there were a war, and especially if Israel were to be destroyed, to just forget about that. Robert says, I don't trust what Scott Ritter or Douglas McGregor are saying. Let's provide who they're getting their information from. I already told you, they're getting their information from lots of contacts they have in the field, a very good background in the field, and paying close attention to the Telegram channels and that cover the daily progress of these wars. There are people on these channels who are showing maps and movements, satellite information of what's going on in these wars each day. And Douglas McGregor and Scott Ritter are keeping track of that. And he said, sorry, Pepe was on 13 years ago, 13 hours ago. I wrote it wrong. Yeah, I watched him this morning. I believe I watched him this morning. He was terrific. So, okay. I think that to accept the accounts of the U.S. mainstream news, to not be skeptical of the U.S. mainstream news, and to be skeptical of Scott Ritter, okay, or Douglas McGregor, is to simply not pay attention to how authentic these people are. They are, okay, on top of it. They don't have any incentive, okay, or motivation to paint the picture in a way that is favorable to the West, that departs from the reality that both see going on. Okay, now, in Douglas McGregor's case, he's more favorable to Israel. He at least wants to see Israel survive. I don't think Scott wants to see that anymore. Robert Copeland says, how about Ben Hodges? You mean General Hodges? Are you talking General Hodges? He's embedded in the U.S. military-industrial complex. He's going to reflect the propaganda biases, okay, of those of that particular environment. He's involved in the propaganda. He's not a free mind who's approaching the situation with any kind of objectivity. Now, it's true that everybody has their biases. There's no question about that. But Ben Hodges has the bias of the U.S. military-industrial complex. His words have to be approached with extreme skepticism. Anyway, I'm going to move to my post now. There we go. So this is my post, which I did not get to do on Friday. It's called Permanent Cures for Debt Ceiling Crises. I wrote it in 2018, but it's still current, okay, at this point. I'm sharing it now. I wrote it on January 28th of 2018. Debt ceiling crisis politics has now provided us a temporary respite by getting a continuing resolution passed that will reopen the government till the next deadline for broader agreement on February 8th. There has been no resolution of the underlying political problem, however, so the likelihood of another government shutdown and still more damage to the economy as a further consequence at that time is substantial. By the way, we're likely to have another debt ceiling crisis following the election. Okay, the Republicans will probably hold the budget hostage again in order to try to get further cuts to it that they want. But anyway, there's been no resolution of the underlying political problem, however, and so the likelihood of another government shutdown and still more damage, okay, to the economy as a further consequence at that time is substantial. So now, while our attention is on the chaos and consequences of debt ceiling crises, okay, it is a good time to consider how we might eliminate them entirely. Here's a rundown on the four most important methods one can use. repealing the debt limit legislation. The first is simple: just repeal the debt ceiling law. The reason it was passed in 1917 was to grant the executive greater spending flexibility while still limiting war spending. That reason is now gone. Also, the president is limited in spending to congressional appropriations and repaying debt instrument obligations of the United States. So the only rationale for retaining it is for one political party or the other to use it as a bargaining chip to get what it wants, which is most often something that hurts many Americans. How long will it take to repeal? It will probably take an afternoon, no more. So why don't the Republicans, who have control of both houses and the presidency, just do it and go ahead with the things they want to do? Because both parties like periodically to cry poverty and to pretend that the government is running out of money. Debt ceiling crises give them an opportunity to posture about the deficit and the debt, which, by the way, Bobby Kennedy is posturing about the deficit and the debt just about every single day now, and then pivot to austerity policies that will please their donors. So that's what's afoot here. By the way, it's still afoot in 2024 and 2025. The next section is called High Value Platinum Coin Seigniorage. According to the U.S. Mint, in fiscal year 2016, the U.S. Mint estimated total revenues are $3,839,982,000. Total expenses are $3,595,307,000, of which $30,468,000 are for capital investments, and net results are $244,675,000 in earnings. The Mint's earnings, that $244,675,000, also known as the quote coin seigniorage, or simply quote unquote seigniorage, is the net profit from coining money and selling it to banks and private individuals. The difference between the cumulative face values of the coins it ships and the expenses it incurs in producing and shipping coins to their buyers, including operating, also material and capital expenses of the Mint during 2016. Both the face values and the seigniorage accumulate in the Mint's Public Enterprise Fund, the PEF account, that is, but during the year. Where is the PEF account? It's at the New York Federal Reserve. That's where the Mint's PEF account is. The Treasury can, quote, sweep, unquote, the PEF, the Public Enterprise Fund account, for the seigniorage into its own spending account at will. That is, there's a law that gives the Treasury the right to sweep the PEF account. The PEF account. So that is a way for the Treasury to get the Fed to mark up Treasury's spending account, for reserves. Of course, in 2016, that would have amounted only to $244,675,000. Not much of a markup to the Treasury spending account. Compared to the credits to its spending account coming from other accounts holding revenue from taxing and selling bonds, the amount of coin seigniorage coming from the Mint is small. But it is there, and it demonstrates there is another way the Treasury gets its spending account filled, so it can spend congressional appropriations funding its spending. And as it turns out, that way of Treasury filling its spending account can be used to much greater effect than in the past, by using the authority of a 1996 law to mint proof platinum coins. These are 1-ounce platinum coins, folks, with arbitrary face values in the trillions of dollars. Treasury, through the Mint, can cause the Fed to fill the PEF with enough reserves that is markups or additions to the Treasury to the PEF account to allow it to use the resulting seigniorage to perform its already congressionally mandated spending and even enough to pay off its existing debt. This idea, originating with Beowulf, who was attorney Carlos Mucha, in its trillion-dollar TDC form, has gotten a lot of attention during the net ceiling crises of 2011 and 2012 to 2013. But a variation of it in its high-value platinum coin seigniorage HVPCS form, requiring a coin with face value of $100 trillion, for example, has received much less attention. And the differences in the TDC and the HVPCS variations in their political implications are great. The TDC, the trillion-dollar coin, looks like a temporary expedient to get around debt ceiling problems, whose use can be repeated when it's needed. But it doesn't quickly remove the political problem of, quote, the national debt, unquote, from consciousness as one of our most serious political problems. On the other hand, minting a $100 trillion coin would change the background of politics by providing for relatively rapid payoff of the debt subject to the limit without balanced budget creating recessions. If such a coin were used, then there would be no more austerity talk and no questions about, quote, how you're going to pay for it, unquote. Since one can always answer, quote, well, once Congress funds it, then Treasury can get reserves in its spending account from the Fed through transferring existing reserves in other accounts, including its PEF account previously filled with high-value platinum coin seigniorage. That is, the Treasury orders the Federal Reserve to increase the balance in its spending account by ordering the Mint to issue platinum coins when it wants to fill it and ship the coins to the Federal Reserve for deposit. The coins then serve as a message, an order from Treasury to fill up the Mint's PEF account. Once that's done, Treasury can then send an order to the Fed to debit, mark down the PEF account for the value of the seigniorage, and credit, mark up the Treasury spending account, in that amount. That is the amount of the message, specified in the message. I've discussed HVPCS at length in my book, that is Fixing a Debt Without Breaking America, in many posts at New Economic Perspectives, which is the blog of the economics department at the University of Missouri at Kansas City, and on my current blog, which of course is the blog you're looking at right now, covering the subject comprehensively. So if you're interested in more detailed information on HVPCS, then these are the places to go. That is on high-value platinum coin seigniorage. But there's a second method to use. That's overt congressional financing. This clause is needed in every appropriations bill. The Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account at the New York Federal Reserve with the addition to its reserve balance necessary to spend this appropriation. In addition, the Federal Reserve is directed to fill the Treasury spending account with the additions to the Treasury reserve balances necessary to repay all outstanding debt instruments, including principal and interest, as they fall due for the fiscal year of this appropriation. The first sentence of this, of course, covers spending the congressional appropriation. The second sentence covers repaying all the outstanding debt that's due during the fiscal year of the appropriation. So year after year, gradually, the second sentence provides for paying off the national debt. Now, so much of the national debt is short-term debt that, off the top of my head, within 2 years, half the national debt would be paid by using overt congressional financing. Everybody could see the national debt is no problem. Everybody could see that Congress can pay it off in a very safe, and gradual way. And there's a graphic called Create Overt Congressional Financing, which gives you those same two sentences. The first sentence ensures that in the event there is deficit spending in any appropriations bill, reserves would already exist in the Treasury spending account to allow Treasury to perform its mandated spending without further borrowing. So from the point the language is included in federal legislation, further Treasury borrowing to, quote, pay for, unquote, deficit spending will cease to exist. The second sentence ensures that reserves will already exist in the Treasury spending account to repay principal and interest on outstanding debt instruments as they fall due throughout the fiscal year of the appropriation. So from the point the language is passed, the Treasury debt will be in continuous decline until after 30 years it will be gone entirely, provided, of course, the federal government doesn't want to issue new debt instruments for other reasons than simply needing to pay the debt off. Let us call incorporation of this language in appropriations and CR bills. CR bills are continuing resolution bills. Overt congressional financing, or OCF, of fiscal policy and associated deficit spending. And what we have now, we can call, in contrast, implicit congressional financing, or ICF. OCF is better than ICF, and that is much more transparent and almost immediately will be much more popular with most people than ICF and its load of public debt instruments. Because, of course, with OCF, you get rid of the public debt instruments, and this whole terrorism business is, oh, the debt is $35 trillion. How can we ever repay that? It's going to be $95,000 per person. Everybody's going to owe it. BS. You do overt congressional financing, it's gone. It's done. That is not a debt of each of the individuals in the United States. It's the government's debt. Let it pay off that debt with the government's capability to create money through either overt congressional financing, or through high-value platinum coin seniorage. Within 6 months of passage of the legislation providing for the OCF, its effects will be visible enough for the public to see that, quote, the debt is a dead political issue killed by the legislation, and for the more reflective among them to learn the lesson that the debt was never a bona fide financial issue, but always a political one caused by the failure of people to understand the fiscal power of a monetarily sovereign government to repay its own debt instruments as they fall due. At that point, and even before that, for many people, we will see the end of austerity politics, periodic debt ceiling crises, fiscal cliffs, sequesters, and budget crises. Now, OCF directly ends debt ceiling crises because the debt is no longer relevant except as a constantly shrinking obligation that will be paid off as it falls due. As for fiscal cliffs, sequesters, and budget crises, their justification is primarily in the false claim that the United States is running out of money and must slow the growth of the national debt enough to allow the debt to GDP ratio to shrink so that we can't afford to implement the deficit spending that may be necessary to create full employment, pass Medicare for all, and do other things that a majority of the population supports heavily but does not insist upon in the face of supposed budget problems. There would be no fiscal cliff, sequesters, or budget crises without the claim that there is a government budget constraint. Once we dispel that claim with overt congressional financing, these things will be gone with the wind, and a new set of hopefully more fruitful problems will emerge I look forward to these new problems, the real problems posed by the need to win debates with conservatives about the likely effects of fiscal policy for public purpose, rather than the faux problems of imaginary fiscal constraints giving rise to neoliberal austerity. It will be a great step forward for American democracy, provided, of course, if American democracy in any way, shape, or form continues to exist with the Supreme Court we have now. That, of course, is an addition that was not in the blog. Making the Fed an agency within the Treasury Department. Yeah, that's another way to handle the problem. When Congress created the Federal Reserve in 1913, progressives and many others believed the Fed could be staffed by technocrats who would be unbiased and who could be trusted to perform the vital functions of the Fed in a way that was fair and even handed. But over the years, faith in technocrats has vastly eroded, and the legitimacy of the Fed has been undermined in part because its, quote, independence, unquote, from Wall Street interests is seen by many as a myth. The crash of 2008 and its aftermath have heightened suspicions about who the Fed actually works for. They have strengthened the conviction it works for Wall Street alone, never for Main Street. After all, where was the $30 trillion plus worth of credit facilities for mortgage holders on Main Street that the Fed supplied to Wall Street and the big banks to bail them out? Yes. During the crisis of 2008, $30 trillion plus worth of credit facilities was made available to Wall Street holders, but not to Main Street. In addition, the feeling is widespread among the American people that the established institutions are corrupt, and that what is lacking is much more bottom-up democracy and much less trust in these institutions and their officials to fix them. So in this, a time of coming progressive revolution, hopefully, it is time to consider once again whether the U.S. needs, unquote, independent, unquote, central bank run by technocrats and accountable only to Congress, or a central bank under the president, which would be accountable to the people through the president's accountability as well as accountable through Congress. Now, of course, that assumes the president would be accountable, but the Supreme Court is seeing fit to practically eliminate that accountability, but I think that will not stand, and I will say why as time goes on in other live streams. Raising that question leads to another even older one. Did the Congress, in creating the Fed, exceed its constitutional authority? The Constitution provides for only 3 branches of government and for only one supreme executive for the American people. But there is the Fed with its Board of Governors and its chairperson, clearly an executive agency of the federal government, supposedly serving the people and the public purpose, but, quote, independent, unquote, of the authority of the United States. On the face of it, that arrangement is unconstitutional and should be ended through Congress reorganizing the Fed under the Treasury and also nationalizing the regional banks. Okay, the next section, is an evaluation of these permanent cures for debt ceilings. Which of these, quote, permanent cures should progressives push for at this juncture of history? Repealing the debt limit law seems like the easiest fix from a purely political point of view, and it would end debt ceiling crises. But it will not remove debt terrorism from the political sphere, because even if you did remove the debt limit, well, we'd still owe $35 trillion, and you'd still have these lobby groups from Wall Street and from Washington screaming about how each individual is going to have to pay back $100,000 apiece to pay off the national debt. Well, we don't want that anymore. The debt terrorists would still be using the size of the debt to oppose progressive fiscal policy. And they would probably still be successful as imposing deficit reduction as the aim of fiscal policy, as so-called fiscal responsibility. Removing the debt limit removes one rationale for government shutdowns, but there is still another available failure of the two parties to agree on a budget because they both agree on deficit reduction, but not on the mix of tax cuts and spending. Worst of all, the background of rising debt will continue to fuel the austerity politics that has been most responsible for the decline of democracy in America. Second solution, using high-value platinum coin seigniorage, would remove debt ceiling crises and eventually the debt itself from the political table, freeing up available policy space for the advance of progressive fiscal policy. But there is one problem. The president has to order the Secretary of the Treasury to mint a 1-ounce platinum coin with a face value high enough to provide for ending the debt. However, there is little possibility right now that Donald Trump, and remember, this was written in 2018, will do that, since his party, after passing its huge tax cuts, plans to cut entitlements, pleading that the government can't afford them due to the size of the national debt, which, by the way, is exactly what happened. He passed those big tax cuts, and then the Republican Party started terrorizing people over the debt and put through some cuts. The third permanent cure is overt congressional financing. It shares the advantage of ending the debt ceiling crises and also removing the debt issue from politics with the HVPCS solution. But it too is politically infeasible because the Republican Congress will not at this juncture give up its debt ceiling weapon against programs favored by the Democrats in Congress. And that still applies, of course, because the Republicans now have control of the House at present. Lastly, there is the cure of reorganizing the Fed under the Treasury. This is the best constitutional solution to the problem of debt ceiling crises and the existence of the debt, but is also one that the Republican Congress is most unlikely to support. Also, I don't think the Democrats are very likely to support that. So none of the permanent cures is feasible or likely right now. But what happens if the Republicans lose both houses of Congress? And depending on how progressive the new Congress is, change may be possible. The most likely change is repealing the debt limit law, since intense public pressure might be great enough to both move the Congress and the president to at least put an end to the damaging politics of debt ceiling crises. However, of course, that this did not prove to be the case. We had the Democrats take over both houses of Congress in 2021. They didn't have the guts to try to repeal the debt limit law, even though they were willing to run high deficits. They didn't have the guts to try to repeal that law, so they left the weapon for the Republicans to use. The HVPCS, overt congressional financing, and Fed reorganization options are still unlikely since Trump or another Republican bent on austerity for everyone, but the top end of business people will still be in the presidency and will very likely retain enough support in Congress to prevent the hostile Congress from overriding a presidential veto. So any change that will remove the political problem of the national debt from politics will have to await 2021 at the earliest. What happened in 2021? Well, I'll interweave that as I go through here. Then, if a progressive president and Congress are both elected, repeal of the debt limit bill is probably a certainty. The broader question is whether such a Congress will pass one of the permanent cures, or whether the president will order the HVPCS solution. In my view, the president may do that if she or he understands the overriding political importance of removing the debt issue from politics for good and completely reorienting Washington away from austerity politics. But it is much more likely that a progressive Congress will end a perceived but faux debt problem by passing overt congressional financing. OCF doesn't go as far as ending the Fed, but it does end the political problems of the debt and the debt limit law by providing for gradual repayment of the debt without raising taxes in a highly visible way. So opposition to it should be the least among the three permanent cures to both problems. That is why it is likely to be the option passed by the progressive Congress, supported by a progressive in the White House. Unfortunately, in 2021, we did not get a progressive Congress. We got a Democratic Congress, but it was hamstrung by 10 Democratic senators who were relatively conservative, especially by Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, but there were fully 10 of them. who were don't qualify as progressives in any sense of the word. That was in the Senate, and we had Nancy Pelosi running the House as the Speaker of the House. Okay, that was not. I hope that would not be the case, but of course the squad failed to oppose her in 2021 when they had the chance to knock her out, and so they still got austerity politics from her in certain respects and various compromises with the conservatives. So OCF never came to pass. The president, of course, did not have the guts to use high value platinum coin seniorage, okay, even though he might have. And so none of these permanent cures for debt ceiling crises were used. And here we are coming into 2025. And the way the election situation is looking right now, it's quite unlikely that these cures are going to be used. And so that means we'll be subject to debt ceiling crises and austerity politics for some time to come, unless we have over the next 4 months or so, unless we have substantial changes. So there we are. I have a really pretty good attendance, tonight. I'm very glad to see that. So anyway, that finishes my business on fiscal crises, and the way to end debt ceiling crises. And that presents an alternative view to the view I went over Friday, of Ellen Brown. So I'm going to stop sharing this, at this point. And I will go to my final thing, of the night. But before I do, Ben Hodges. April, Joe, how can we get the people that think the taxes fund spending, that just one day of expenses or 1 week, a month, etc., wouldn't cover the federal bill if it had to use tax revenue? Well, if we used high-value platinum coin seniorage, or we used overt congressional financing, both of those things would get the public to realize that taxes do not fund spending. We would be in a much better position to explain to them why taxes do not fund spending at the federal level. Robert Copeland says, neither two main political parties want the $100 trillion platinum coin as they like the current funding system we have now. That's a very good reason for getting rid, yet another reason to get rid of the two main political parties, because they both want to play austerity politics. They don't want to legislate for the public purpose. Robert Copeland says, wonder how many people in the United States but know about MMT. I bet it's like 0.01 of 1%. You may be right, Robert. You may be right. I've been working hard to spread the news now since 2010. I mean, it's nearly 15 years now. April says, wow, Joe, your book needs to be in schools. It's so well written, light and breezy, that exhale of relief everyone needs. But the establishment wouldn't hand over the antidote to the masses. What they like better is propaganda, guilt porn, as April says. Okay, I'm now going to go to our last piece of the night, which is a tweet storm by Robert C. Hockett, who's a professor at Cornell University, a distinguished university professor of law, at Cornell University, in the law school, and very brilliant when it comes to constitutional law and when it comes to law in general, and also when it comes to MMT. He's one lawyer who knows MMT very, very well and the ins and outs of it. But of course, he also had some very definite opinions on the Supreme Court and the latest decision of the Supreme Court. So I now want to share his tweet storm today. I think it appeared today, or maybe last night while I was still streaming and I couldn't see it. But here are the 12 tweets for your amusement and mine. 1 of 11. Okay, kids, time for your presidential immunity exam. As you know, the Supreme Court has held that U.S. presidents are absolutely immune from online prosecutions for actions they take in their official capacities. Here follows a series of hypotheticals for you to assess. I don't think that first tweet is, well, that requires further arguments because the Supreme Court said they are absolutely immune from criminal prosecutions for actions they take in their core constitutional capacities, and they are presumptively immune for actions that they take in their other official capacities, and that they can only be prosecuted for actions they take, in the unofficial capacities, of a president. Anyway, going further with the hypotheticals. 211, number 1. President Biden learns of a criminal plot against our Constitution underway in Mar-a-Lago, a cult compound in Florida, reminiscent of one shut down in Waco, Texas years back. He instructs the National Guard to, quote, take no prisoners, unquote, in shutting it down. Is he immune from prosecution? Immune? Question mark, says Bob. And here's number 3 of 11, also number 2 of the questions. President Biden learns that the wives of 2 Supreme Court justices are insurrectionists, that 2 Supreme Court justices are likely rapists, that at least 3 are being actively bribed by billionaire donors. He instructs the DHS to arrest and detain them pending investigation. And then the question, is he immune? Immune, question mark. Immune, question mark. Number 4 of 11, which is also number 3. The Ukrainian court condemns Donald Trump in absentia for attempted extortion of President Zelensky in 2018 and asks that he be extradited. President Biden instructs the Department of Justice to conduct a Bush II style, quote, extraordinary rendition of Trump to Ukraine. Again, the question is, immune? Is he immune? I don't think he would be if he did that. And if that happened. Number 5 of 11. Number 4, President Biden determines that Senator Mitch McConnell from 2016 through 2020 at least abused the selection process for federal judges in a manner amounting to treason. He instructs the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, to arrest and detain him in Gitmo pending investigation. Immune? It seems to me, according to what the Supreme Court decided, he would likely be immune for these 4 acts. Number 5, President Biden determines that Senators Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, Mike Lee, and sundry other members of Congress participated in open insurrection on January 6th of 2021. He instructs the DHS to arrest and detain them in Gitmo pending criminal investigation. And again, the question, immune? Number 7 out of 11, and number 6 of the questions. President Biden determines the House, quote, Freedom Caucus, unquote, and other members of Congress, including Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema, are foreign agents sabotaging Congress. He instructs the DHS to arrest them and detain them in Gitmo pending investigation. Is he immune? Number 8 of 11, which is number 7 of the questions. President Biden determines that private equity and hedge funds, real estate trusts, pharmaceutical companies, petroleum and agricultural concerns, and other entities are conspiring to impoverish working class Americans. He instructs DHS to, is he immune? Well, he would have presumptive immunity for these things. But I'll go over them to summarize when we're through. 9 out of 11, or number 8, President Biden determines that student debt, medical debt, and mortgage debt are dashing the prospects of Americans to enter or remain in the middle class, a threat to our constitutional order. He instructs the DOJ to arrest and detain all the debt collectors. And again, is he immune? Number 9, President Biden determines Fox, Sinclair, and other reactionary media outlets are committing both A, fraud on the public in claiming to be news entities, and B, treason on behalf of foreign governments by subverting our governments. He, is he immune? And number 11, of 11, also number 10 of the questions, President Biden, fascinated by Donald Trump's 2015 claim that he could, quote, shoot someone on Fifth Avenue, unquote, and still be elected, spots Trump on Fifth Avenue. Convinced that Trump is an agent of a hostile foreign government, he shoots him dead. Under the Supreme Court's decision, is he immune? Well, let's review each of the questions and try to give an answer. President Biden learns of a criminal plot against our Constitution underway, in Mar-a-Lago. He instructs the National Guard to take no prisoners in shutting it down. But is he immune? Well, it seems to me he is. That he would have immunity that would be absolute in this case, because certainly one of the core functions, okay, of the executive, okay, is to maintain order, okay, in the country. And so he could justify that by saying that there's a criminal plot against our Constitution. And he's charged with the responsibility to defend against criminal plots against our Constitution. That's a core function of the executive. So he would have absolute immunity in that case. Now, in the case of number 2, he learns the wives of 2 Supreme Court justices are insurrected, that 2 are likely rapists, and that at least 3 are being actively bribed by billionaire donors. So he instructs, okay, DHS to arrest and detain them, pending investigation. Would he be immune? Well, I don't know if the immunity is absolute, okay, in those cases, but he would have presumptive immunity for sure. So the Department of Justice would have to take him to court, or some other authority would have to take him to court, and they would have to argue, okay, that he was not immune for doing this, that it was not done in the course of his official duty. But it certainly sounds official. I mean, after all, if he has 2 insurrectionists in the wives of 2 Supreme Court justices, doesn't he have the right to have the DHS or the FBI arrest those 2 Supreme Court wives? And if there were 2 others who were likely rapists, then doesn't he have the authority to use the Department of Justice? I don't know if he would have that authority, because generally speaking, I think rape is a local crime. I don't know if rape is a federal crime in that instance. But if he was doing this and said this was being done, okay, in his official capacity, then people would have to go into court and argue that the presumption of innocence doesn't exist in this case, that he is presumptively immune. Going further, number 3, this one deals with foreign policy. That's an area where the Supreme Court is convinced that the president has absolute immunity for official actions. So, okay, if he did this to Trump, he would be immune from prosecution. He could do this to Trump right now, actually. He could do this to Trump but tomorrow. Well, of course, he'd have to get a Ukrainian court to condemn Donald Trump in absentia, but that might not be too hard. In most of these, it's clear that President Biden, maybe in all of them, was acting in an official capacity. And that would mean that he would have a presumption, okay, of immunity. And so he would not be accountable, okay, for these 10 actions, including the murder of Trump, okay, on Fifth Avenue. He could explain he was convinced that Trump is an agent of a foreign government. And so that his action was an official action. Or if you think this is too far-fetched, he could probably order one of his secret agents to shoot Trump. He goes everywhere with the Secret Service. He could probably order one of the Secret Service people to shoot Trump. By the way, all of these could be reversed in some way. President Trump could actually determine that the New York Times Company and the Washington Post Company and the Los Angeles Times Company are radical media outlets committing both fraud on the public and claiming to be news entities, and B, committing treason on behalf of foreign governments by subverting our government. So many of these could be turned around in a similar way to apply to Trump if he becomes the president. These are all very good illustrations of how extreme this decision by the Supreme Court was. Okay, now yesterday, I went over how we could do something about the decision of the Supreme Court, how Biden could do something. I will most probably be continuing that sort of discussion in tomorrow night's show. Unless something happens in foreign affairs which absolutely requires that I give it a priority, I'll probably be continuing to talk about this because, after all, President Biden needs to be informed about what he can do to see to it that this decision and other radical decisions of the Supreme Court can be reversed in the short run. He has to do whatever he can to reverse these decisions, especially this last decision, okay, in the immunity case. It sets us up for totalitarianism. Now, what about charges from others, obvious charges, that Biden was being a totalitarian, okay, because he did this? What Biden could do is to simply say, is to announce that he is no longer running for president. As he knows, his career, okay, has come to an end. He really wouldn't be able to handle the job, okay, for another 4 years. So he's retiring from the campaign and clearing the way for other people. But before he goes, he wants to save democracy here, okay, in the United States. And that in order to do that, he has to see to it that a number of decisions by the right-wing Supreme Court are repealed before he leaves office. And then he could proceed to interfere, okay, in the election campaigns, okay, in an official capacity, to see that there's no cheating and no rigging, okay, of the campaigns. He could dispatch his federal agents to all the states to see to it that there's no coercion from right-wing elements at the polls. He could dispatch his agents, okay, to see to it that there are no shenanigans of any kind at the polls in the whole country. And he could claim he was doing that. He was doing that in a completely official capacity. He wasn't doing it to benefit himself because he was no longer running. He could claim to be completely above the fray. And he could go on, and through these interventions, he could make it clear that the right-wing Republican Party in Congress has to be defeated, that we must have a non-Republican Congress. And the reason why is that all the Republicans in Congress will support, okay, the decisions of the Supreme Court, all of the very bad ones, starting with the Citizens United decision of 2010, going through to all of the other right-wing decisions that have been made since then. If the president gets the kind of Congress that's full of people who want to do something about these particular decisions, he could then collaborate with them to pass laws to nullify each of them between January 3rd and January 20th, when he leaves office, of 2025. There would be one bill for each of the decisions by the Supreme Court. Each bill would have language from Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution, the exceptions clause of the Constitution, prohibiting the Supreme Court or any of the appellate courts from reviewing these bills and declaring them unconstitutional or interpreting them in any way. Each of these bills would have the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court removed from it. There might be some 10 of these bills, okay, altogether. Then he should be able to pass, okay, an 11th bill, which would add 6 more justices to the Supreme Court, thus creating a Supreme Court where the non-MAGA justices would outnumber the MAGA justices by 9-6 and would therefore neutralize those justices, okay, going forward. So they would be powerless. Okay, that would be the final bill that was passed. The penultimate bill that was passed would be the bill to remove the immunity from the president. So in other words, he would be immune for everything he does before passage of that bill that countermands what the Supreme Court said, okay, in the immunity decision. That would remove his own immunity. He's got to do that to make this effective. So he would do that, but only after he had done, okay, all the other things. Now, he would still be immune for the other things because he's protected by the Constitution's prohibition against ex post facto laws. In other words, the law that would be in place until he passes the immunity bill, would be the law as handed down by the Supreme Court, okay, that he was immune for all of the actions that he might be taking between now and the time that his new immunity bill was passed. Actually, it wouldn't be, an immunity bill. It would be an anti-immunity bill. But he would be immune from right now up to the point where he passes, okay, the anti-immunity bill. And the final bill to be passed would be the bill expanding the Supreme Court, which would also have the exceptions clause in it. This is a way for Joe Biden to be the new father of his country, to save American democracy from Donald Trump, okay, and the Republican Party. I believe, okay, that the leadership of the Republican Party and the Republican Party, okay, in Congress, okay, that leadership has become, okay, a party, okay, of neo-fascists. That is the meaning of their unwavering support, okay, for Donald Trump and their outrageous actions in support of him for years and years now. I think that Joe Biden should save us from fascism. He's always talking about saving democracy. The Supreme Court has, ironically, given him the chance to save democracy. I hope he has the guts to use whatever methods he needs to use to save democracy. And then, like George Washington, he needs to step aside for the new president, okay, who will have been elected on November 6th. If he plays his cards right between now, okay, and November 6th, that new president will not be Donald Trump, because there'll be no chance for Donald Trump to actually run a campaign. There are all kinds of things that Biden can do to cripple his campaign and to make sure the elections, okay, are fair. And some might say, well, how can they be fair if Biden takes actions to cripple his campaign? And to that, I say, the Constitution is not, okay, a suicide pact. The primary obligation is to stop the transition to a system, a fascism, to a dictatorship. That is the primary obligation. If you have to use authoritarian methods to accomplish that, that is what you have to do. Because again, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. So that's one of my takes on this. Hope you liked that part of the stream. I have very good attendance tonight. Thank you, everyone. I'm very grateful for it. Please remember, I have a Patreon account, patreon.com/Joe_Firestone. I have a Buy Me a Coffee account at buymeacoffee.com/Joe.Firestone. So one is Joe_Firestone. The other is Joe.Firestone. And of course, I would appreciate any donations that you care to make if you liked this stream, okay, or any others. So thank you very much for coming. Tomorrow I'll be back, and I'm pretty sure I'll be concentrating on the problems that we're going to face in overcoming what the Supreme Court has just done. So thanks very much for coming. I'm going to drink some tea and end my coughing. I hope everyone has a very good night. And again, I'll be back tomorrow night, but at 8 o'clock on Wednesdays, I'm there, okay, at 8 o'clock. And Dee Pierce has her Around the World with Dee and Friends show at 9. And generally, okay, I help her with that show as well as one of her panelists. So good night, everybody. By the way, thank you, Dee, for coming. Thank you, Lana, for coming. Thank you, April, for coming. Thank you, Robert, for coming. And thank you. Where the hell is Steve Wolfbrand tonight? Oh, Steve. Okay. Once again, I'll see you tomorrow night then.